Hey guys, it's me again. Today we're going to talk about horror games and why I feel that walking sims have ruined horror games, or at least had for a while. They're getting better. So, first thing to address is kind of how this came about. The walking sims and like their big prominence in horror games. It started in the 360 with action horror. Action horror became a big thing, right? And a lot of people say action horror is really what killed fighting games. Well, what action horror really did was it wasn't delivering on the horror side, meaning developers were kind of losing the horror side of their audience and maybe losing a bit of the action side of their audience because just the ones that didn't want to deal with the horror part. So they just made action games instead of horror games because it's the bigger audience. That's sad that horror games got neglected, but it's what happened. There are still some really good action horror games. Fear. I will swear by Fear. I love that game, and I feel like a world in which we don't have Alma as a character is a world that is lesser by her absence. So, action horror, it was bad, and it led to a drought. Then came along some indie devs. The guys who made Penumbra would make a game called Amnesia. Amnesia is not a walking sim. Just to preface this, I don't feel that it is, but I feel that it led to what walking sims kind of took over. Amnesia is a pretty good game. It's not as good as a lot of people will say. I think anything that Amnesia does well, other horror games do better. But Amnesia is a pretty fine game. It has an interesting story, and it had some neat puzzles. Some good fear, although bad monster design. Good concepts. Though again, stuff like no fighting, which it's always been praised for, that was done in Clock Tower. And Clock Tower is just more fun to play. Same with Haunting Grounds. But yeah. The problem with what Amnesia brought is it got cloned. And now that's a normal thing to happen in games, especially horror games. Silent Hill's a clone of Resident Evil. I will never not point that out. Thinking that cloning games is bad is dumb. It helps you make genres. Before before Resident Evil came out, horror was in a kind of weird place. There were a lot of FMV games, there was a lot of point-and-click games. This is what Clock Tower originally was. It didn't really have a good formula. They're just kind of latching off whatever it could. Then Resident Evil kind of gave some universal mechanics that it could use, even coining the phrase survival horror. And this is really good. And then Silent Hill took it and ran with it, bringing in the story, really. It had a really good story, especially 2. 2 has an amazing story. And onward. 3 I actually like more, but I'll get into that. And you already know my opinion is 4 is the best. But those games were revolutionary. The problem is Amnesia wasn't cloned to have a Silent Hill. It was cloned to have way lesser versions of those games. And that was the disappointing part. Basically, it felt like to me, and this is very cynical, that indie devs saw those games, saw Amnesia, saw PewDiePie making Amnesia popular, and therefore PewDiePie was getting popular off of Amnesia. It was kind of a symbiotic relationship. That's what happened. And they decided they could make a lot of money if they could make a game that's kind of spooky, get some Let's Players or streamers to stream over it and get 100 views, and then everyone would want to play it because this Let's Player played it, or they want to be the next big Let's Player. This is kind of how that developed. Just getting money and just wanting the cash grab. And yes, everything you do should be fueled by a need for money most of the time. I mean, that's just the thing. Like, you need it to survive. But there was no passion in their work. These aren't people who loved horror. These are people who just wanted to use horror as a tool to get money. They weren't necessarily good at doing the horror. That's why games like Slender exist, because everyone's like, oh, well, Slender's scary, so we'll just do this very low effort game. Everyone will love it. And yeah, I know Slender was free, but The Arrival wasn't. The Arrival had the Marble Hornets guys actually work on it, and guess how much of the story stuff that Marble Hornets wrote that they actually used? Almost none of it. There was barely any. The game could have maybe been actually good if they had done it. I don't know. The gameplay might have still sucked. And it would have still been a walking sim, so it would have actually probably still been trash, but at least you'd have some interesting lore. The walking sim formula boils down Amnesia to walking down a spooky hallway until a jump scare happens. That's what people saw. That's what indie developers saw, and that's what indie developers did. Oddly enough, walking down a spooky hallway until a jump scare happens is what PT does, and I wouldn't qualify that as a jump scare. Or, well, it has a jump scare. As a walking sim. Because it actually makes you use your brain with its puzzles. The last puzzle was near impossible to figure out, right? But those games don't do it. And here's the thing about PT. PT is a trailer that'll take you less than an hour. It's basically a demo. It wasn't going to be reflective of Silent Hills. This was just this is what we're capable of. This is the level of fear we are capable of, and this is the level of puzzle we are capable of. Here you go. It's a great little piece of horror. It's actually why I'm not looking forward to Allison Road. Because it's just going to be more PT, and I don't want more PT. I want Silent Hills. But, you know, it's what we're doing. Hopefully it'll be good. Walking sims are boiled down to not having a lot of gameplay. Maybe you press A. That's why I count Slender as a walking sim, because it's just walking around this uninspired map, trying to find things. Pressing A when you do, and hoping the game doesn't randomly decide to kill you. Which, every time you find an item, it will increase that random chance of killing you. Sorry, thought I heard something. The games aren't fun to play. And they don't have stories. Because they're just walking down the thing. Like, oh no, they tell their stories with the environment. No, they don't. Something doesn't tell its story with environment. Its environment is a crappily rendered woods. Both it and The Arrival. Or, you know, The Arrival also has uninspired mind. Where everything looks the same and you're going to get lost and then killed more. Those games are terrible. And guess what? Slender Man is not scary anymore. But that's just the thing. That's what those games do. They boiled down what could have been a pretty decent formula of Amnesia into its base, laziest components. They show no effort. A lot of them don't even look good. And this is what modern horror was for a while. Like, I know a lot of people will say they can't be that bad, but those weren't the people that were looking at every horror game that came out. I was. Anytime a horror game came out, I'm always super interested in it. And it's just this crap after crap after crap after crap. And then Five Nights at Freddy's happens. Which, Five Nights at Freddy's isn't a walking sim. But all of those problems I listed with walking sims, bad story. If any at all. Sorry, I keep getting distracted. Only can do atmosphere. But bad jump scares. Bad jump scares are in those because they don't know how to do a jump scare. PT did a great jump scare. PT tells you the jump scare is coming. It tells you to look behind you. And guess what? If something tells you to look behind you in a horror game or in a horror situation, just run straight ahead. Never look behind you. You will die. That's what happens in PT. If you know horror tropes, you know that's a bad idea. But if you do it, guess what happens? You die. And it's terrifying. It's so well executed. A lot of games, these walking sims, what they don't realize is that a jump scare does not equate to real fear. You have to know how to use a jump scare. What they think is that this motion, what I just did, that, like, that, even a scream, like, oh, that's fear. That's not fear, that's shock. Shock is not fear. You don't want to shock someone. You want to terrify a person. Shock goes away. Terror stays with them. And that's what you want when you make horror. That's why this doesn't work. And Five Nights at Freddy's had those problems. It was nothing but jump scares and some atmosphere. Also, the game didn't have a good story. At least the first one. Actually, none of them had a good story, but the first one didn't even have a story. Sister Location maybe has something going on. But that's because Sister Location's using the book. Right? Like, the book allowed Scott to go, okay, this is the story I want to tell from start to beginning. Make it clear and concise. The video games, because they started on a basis of no story. Yes, don't delude yourself. The first game doesn't have a story. And also, just think about what the first game introduced into its lore. Kids were killed. The bite. And the killer. The killer was caught in the original game, but he's not past, well, game 3. Let's say. In game 3, it's revealed he wasn't ever caught. Despite the fact that he was clearly caught in the first game. The kids who were killed ended up being more than the original number. And the bite ended up being at a different year? Also, there's this whole debate after the 4th game came out if everything was a dream, and people were mad at that idea. The book literally had to fix that. Am I the only one that remembers that fact? Yeah, it was all a dream. And guess what? No, it was all a dream. That was the original intent, and it was bad, so he changed it. Because that's what he did. Anytime he decided that something didn't work, he would change something, and that's why the story was confusing and not clear. Purple Guy, remember, in 1, Purple Guy's existence didn't matter because he was caught. It didn't matter. There's not a mystery to be solved when the killer is already caught. That's why 2 was a prequel. And Purple Guy in the prequel was Phone Guy. I will stand by this forever. Scott Kaufman could tell me no, that was never the plan, and I would call him a liar. Because it clearly was. I don't want to sound mean to Scott Kaufman because I actually really like his story. Not the story he told, but like his personal story of all of his games were crap. But he decided to give it one last shot, taking the criticism he had gotten from some of his other games and using it to fuel the fire. You know, that's great. That's a wonderful story. Like, more guys should be like him instead of like getting really mad at their criticism. but I don't like his games. The first one didn't have a story. The second one tried. The third one had to change that because I think people guessed it too much. And then they changed it again. The fourth one wasn't even about Purple Guy. And people, for the longest time, couldn't figure out until the book confirmed it that the killer had to be someone who owned Fazbear's Entertainment. This is why I don't think this has ever been explained, at least by no one I've seen, so maybe no one really prominent. If it has, great. But not even going from clues in the game, just real world, a serial killer will try their best to control literally every aspect of their kill. The only other option presented to us on who Purple Guy could have actually been is Phone Guy. Phone Guy does not have the control over this situation. Phone Guy could have not designed the building to have a room that the security cameras couldn't pick up, that the animatronics couldn't enter. Sorry guys, the camera filled up, but I'm close to done with this video, so I thought I'd finish it. Oh, where was I? The story in FNAF just isn't there. They don't have a good basis. There's some good ideas, but generally there wasn't much of a story to go with in the first one, and then everything else has been kind of held together with duct tape. I remember what I was saying. Because if you noticed, it changes from game to game. I'm hoping now that Cisco Location is kind of using a good basis from the book, it'll stay consistent. But it's not. It wasn't until Sister Location. Or was I talking about the serial killer thing? I quickly go over that. I'm sorry, I'm having to remember what I was doing. I had to clear some space off the camera. The thought is just based off of how serial killers work. They would want to control everything, and the only one who could do that is the person that owns Fazbear's Entertainment, right? Because they would be able to get the suits to work the way they want the suits to work. They would be able to design the building the way they want it to be designed. So it has all those weird things, like a room that the cameras don't pick up, or that the animatronics can't go in. They would be able to design all of this stuff so they'd be able to continue their killing. Another big key is the fact that Phone Guy is hired in the first place. Here's the thing. If you're head of security and a child, let alone 5, die under your watch, you are fired forever. It's not your fault, but you are fired forever, and you are not getting a job. In fact, that's going to follow you on your resume most likely. Phone Guy kept getting hired by Fazbear's Entertainment. That should have been your first clue that he wasn't the killer. The killer was the guy who was hiring him, because clearly he can get away with it with someone as incompetent as Phone Guy. So that's really what was going on. That was something that I don't think anyone noticed. And it wasn't even what they were going to go, what Scott was going with in the first game. And honestly, or the second game. First game, he wasn't going with anything again. Honestly, I didn't pick up on this until the third game. I was just kind of all in on whatever, because I didn't care enough. And I shouldn't have cared afterwards, because I don't like the games. But, you know, sometimes I obsess. And then gameplay-wise, it ticks that box as well. Like, the gameplay in walking sims are not inspiring. The gameplay in FNAF isn't fun. Guys, it's just sitting in a room. It's almost worse than a walking sim. And I was watching FNAF with horror. that more games have become like this. And guess what? I wasn't wrong. It happened. There were more FNAF clones. Maybe you don't remember them. That's because they were all terrible. Because FNAF is a terrible thing to base a clone off of. That's what happened. But now we have Resident Evil 7, we have Alien Isolation, we have Fatal Frame 5. These games should give you hope for the future of horror. It's pretty great. That's all. I think my girlfriend's trying to get in touch with me, so I'm done, guys. Bye.